20 child stars who vanished from Hollywood then and now. They were the faces we adored on our television screens and movie theaters. Their smiles graced magazine covers, and their names topped marquees across America. But then, suddenly, they were gone. 30 child stars who once had the world at their feet, household names from Hollywood's golden era. What happened to these beloved young talents when the cameras stopped rolling? Some of their stories will break your heart, while others might just restore your faith in humanity. Now, let's dive into these fascinating stories one by one, starting with some of the most beloved child performers from the 1930s through the 1970s. 1. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll wasn't just any child actor. He was Disney's first contracted child star, the voice of Peter Pan and the face of Treasure Island. With his Academy Juvenile Award at just 12 years old for his performance in The Window and So Dear to My Heart, his future seemed limitless. But puberty hit Bobby hard. His cherubic face, once his greatest asset, began changing. Acne scarred his skin, and his features matured. Walt Disney himself, who had once treated Bobby like a son, terminated his contract abruptly in 1953, just 3 years after he had starred in the studio's live-action hit Treasure Island. Industry insiders report that Disney executives claimed Bobby had become difficult to work with, but the reality was far crueler. He simply no longer fit the image they wanted. Dropped by Disney and labeled washed up at 16, Bobby tumbled into a devastating spiral of drug addiction and petty crime. His parents, unsure how to handle his growing problems, sent him to a rehabilitation center, but it did little good. By his early 20s, he was deep into heroin addiction, arrested multiple times, and completely estranged from the industry that had once celebrated him. The final chapter of Bobby's life reads like a Greek tragedy. In 1968, children playing in an abandoned tenement building in New York City discovered the body of a man. With no identification, he was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave on Hart Island. Almost 2 years later, his mother, having lost contact with her son, requested the NYPD reopen their investigation into his disappearance. Fingerprint records confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The unclaimed body was Bobby Driscoll, dead at 31 from heart failure caused by his long-term drug use. The boy who once flew as Peter Pan ended his days alone, forgotten, and unrecognized, perhaps the cruelest twist in a life that began with such promise. 2. Margaret O'Brien. Unlike Bobby's tragic tale, Margaret O'Brien's story takes a more hopeful turn. As a child, she captivated audiences with her emotional depth in films like Meet Me in St. Louis, opposite Judy Garland. Her performance as Tootie Smith earned her a special Academy Juvenile Award, and her ability to cry on cue made her one of MGM's most valuable child assets. By the early 1950s, however, Margaret's career had slowed considerably. The transition from adorable child to teenager proved challenging, and roles became scarce. Rather than chasing diminishing opportunities, Margaret made a conscious choice to step away from Hollywood's spotlight. What happened next defies the typical child star narrative. Margaret redirected her energies toward education and a private life. She married and focused on family, making occasional appearances in television and theater but never attempting to recapture her former glory. Today, at 87 years old, Margaret O'Brien lives a quiet life in California. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she managed her finances well and remains one of the few living links to Hollywood's golden age. She occasionally appears at film festivals and classic movie events where fans are delighted to discover she's maintained the same gentle spirit and warm smile that endeared her to audiences over 8 decades ago. Margaret's choice to leave Hollywood on her own terms rather than being forced out by changing tastes or fading popularity represents a road less traveled among child stars, one of graceful exit rather than painful expulsion. 3. Claude Jarman Jr. When The Yearling premiered in 1946, critics and audiences alike were mesmerized by the natural performance of 12-year-old Claude Jarman Jr. as Jody Baxter. His authentic portrayal of a boy and his pet deer in rural Florida earned him an Academy Juvenile Award and seemed to promise a long, successful career in cinema. Yet by the early 1950s, Claude's name disappeared from marquees, and his face vanished from movie screens. What happened to this talented young actor who had once shared the screen with Gregory Peck and Jane Wyman? Unlike many child stars who were pushed out of the industry, Claude made the unusual choice to leave Hollywood voluntarily. As a teenager, he recognized that education might provide more stability than the fickle film industry. After appearing in intriguing but less commercially successful films like Intruder in the Dust, Claude chose to return to his native Tennessee to finish high school among peers instead of on studio lots. After graduating, Claude attended Vanderbilt University rather than pursuing comeback roles. He served in the Navy before eventually settling in San Francisco, where he took on a role far from the Hollywood cameras as the executive director of the San Francisco International Film Festival for 15 years. Today, at 89, Claude Jarman Jr. lives a fulfilling life with his family, occasionally granting interviews about his brief but significant contribution to cinema history. His choice to prioritize education and a normal life over fame presents a stark contrast to peers who desperately clung to their acting careers past their prime, often with devastating consequences. 4. Deanna Durbin. Few child stars achieved the level of international fame that surrounded Deanna Durbin in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Her soprano voice and wholesome image made her one of Universal Studios' most profitable stars, reportedly saving the studio from bankruptcy. Her popularity was so immense that a fan club devoted to her boasted more members than any other stars at the time. By age 21, Deanna was the second highest paid woman in America, behind only Bette Davis, commanding $400,000 per film. Yet at the absolute peak of her career, Deanna made a shocking announcement that stunned Hollywood and broke millions of fans' hearts. At just 27 years old, she was retiring from film completely. Unlike other stars pushed out by changing tastes or aging, Deanna walked away from a $200,000 per year contract, voluntarily abandoning a career that others would have killed for. In 1949, after completing her 21st film, For the Love of Mary, Deanna Durbin simply vanished from public life. She moved to a small village outside Paris, France, married her third husband, producer Charles David, and for the next 64 years of her life, refused nearly all interview requests and declined every offer to return to performing. Her withdrawal was so complete that many younger Americans have never even heard her name, despite her once being among the most famous women in the world. When asked years later about her decision, Deanna made a rare statement. "I was never happy in Hollywood. I couldn't deal with the unreality of the life I was expected to live." She explained that the manufactured image of the perpetual girl next door had become suffocating, and no amount of money could compensate for the loss of her privacy and authentic self. Deanna lived quietly in France until her death in 2013 at age 91, steadfastly refusing all attempts to coax her back into the spotlight. Her deliberate choice to walk away from fame and fortune remains perhaps the most dramatic self-imposed disappearance in Hollywood history. 5. Brandon DeWilde. With his blonde hair and expressive blue eyes, Brandon DeWilde captured hearts in Shane, 1953, delivering the iconic line, "Shane, come back." That still resonates in film history. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination at just 11 years old, making him one of the youngest nominees ever. Unlike many child actors who struggle to find adult roles, Brandon successfully transitioned to teenage parts in films like HUD, alongside Paul Newman, and television series including The Virginian. His talent seemed to promise a long, successful career as an adult actor, but fate had other plans for Brandon. In July 1972, while driving near Denver, Colorado, he lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a construction truck. At just 30 years old, Brandon DeWilde's promising life was cut tragically short. The boy who had once called for Shane to come back would never return to the screen himself. His death at such a young age left fans wondering what might have been. Critics believe Brandon had the talent and range to become one of his generation's finest character actors. Instead, his filmography remains frozen at a mere 17 films, a small but significant legacy. Brandon's story reminds us of the fragility of life and how suddenly promising careers can be extinguished. While not a disappearance by choice, his premature death removed him from Hollywood's constellation of stars just as he was entering what should have been his prime years as an actor. 6. Shirley Temple. No discussion of child stars could begin anywhere but with Shirley Temple, the most famous child actor in Hollywood history. With her bouncing curls and dimpled smile, she single-handedly lifted American spirits during the Great Depression. By age 7, she was earning $50,000 per film equivalent to nearly $1 million today, and her merchandise, from dolls to clothing lines, generated millions more. Yet even Shirley Temple, the brightest star in the child actor firmament, faced Hollywood's brutal reality. Children grow up. As she entered adolescence, her box office appeal waned dramatically. 20th Century Fox, the studio that had profited immensely from her childhood popularity, dropped her contract when she turned 12. After a few unsuccessful attempts at teenage roles, including a screen test for The Wizard of Oz that didn't pan out, Shirley retired from films at the remarkably young age of 22. But unlike many former child stars who vanished into obscurity or struggled with the loss of fame, Shirley Temple Black, as she became known after marriage, engineered one of the most successful second acts in American public life. After raising her children, she entered politics, running unsuccessfully for Congress before being appointed as a UN delegate in 1969. Her diplomatic career flourished as she became U.S. ambassador to Ghana and later to Czechoslovakia, proving her talents extended far beyond dimpled smiles and tap dancing. Shirley maintained a dignified public persona throughout her life, rarely expressing bitterness about her dramatic fall from Hollywood's heights. When asked about her extraordinary journey from child star to diplomat, she once remarked, "I have one piece of advice for those who want to become actors. Don't." Her later career in public service until her death in 2014 demonstrated that leaving Hollywood's spotlight didn't mean disappearing from meaningful contribution to society, a valuable lesson for child stars who followed in her tiny tap shoes. 7. Tommy Rettig. For millions of Americans who grew up in the 1950s, Tommy Rettig was simply Jeff Miller, the first boy owner of the famous collie in the Lassie television series. With his all-American looks and natural rapport with the canine star, Tommy became a household name and one of the most recognizable child actors of his era. But Tommy's relationship with fame was complicated. By 14, he had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his celebrity status and the constraints it placed on his normal development. In a decision that shocked producers, he asked to be released from his Lassie contract, walking away from what many considered a dream role. The reality of post-Lassie life proved hard. Like many child actors, Tommy found that casting directors had difficulty seeing him as anything other than the boy with the famous dog. Roles became scarce, and by his late teens, Tommy had largely disappeared from television and film. His adult years followed a tumultuous path. In the 1960s, he was arrested for growing marijuana, a conviction that further damaged his chances of reviving his acting career. Struggling to find his place, Tommy cycled through various jobs, farmhand to computer programmer. Ironically, it was in this latter career that Tommy finally found post-fame satisfaction. Becoming an early expert in database programming, he established himself as a respected software consultant and author of programming books. A career about as far from Hollywood as one could imagine. Tommy died at age 54 in 1996, having lived a life defined by dramatic reinvention. 8. Diana Sarah Baby Peggy. Long before Shirley Temple's curls bounced across screens, there was Baby Peggy, one of silent cinema's first child stars. Between 1921 and 1924, this diminutive performer made over 150 short films and several features, becoming a global sensation before she turned 6 years old. With her trademark pageboy haircut and solemn expression, she delighted audiences with her ability to parody adult stars like Rudolph Valentino and Pola Negri. At the height of her fame, Baby Peggy earned an astounding $1.5 million a year, equivalent to roughly $23 million today, supported her entire extended family, and received over 1.7 million fan letters, figures that would be impressive for any star, let alone a kindergartner. But Baby Peggy's stardom came at a terrible price. Her father, a former cowboy with Hollywood connections, managed her career with an iron fist, forcing her to work up to 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. She received no education, had no friends her own age, and never saw a penny of her enormous earnings. When she would cry on set from exhaustion, crew members would hold an ice cube to her face until she stopped. By 1925, her career had collapsed due to her father's arguments with producers and mismanagement of her finances. The family's fortune vanished almost overnight through bad investments and lavish spending. By age 7, Baby Peggy was washed up, a has-been before most children start first grade. The family's financial desperation forced her back to work in vaudeville, where she toured exhaustively until the Great Depression ended that revenue stream as well. By her teenage years, her identity as Baby Peggy had become such a burden that she legally changed her name to Diana Sarah Carey, attempting to distance herself from her exploited childhood. Diana spent decades in relative obscurity, working ordinary jobs and struggling to understand what had happened to her extraordinary childhood. It wasn't until her 70s that film historians rediscovered her significance to cinema history, and she began speaking publicly about child exploitation in early Hollywood. She lived to the remarkable age of 101, passing away in 2020 as the last surviving major star of the silent era. In her later years, Diana became an author and advocate for child actors' rights, turning her painful experiences into a force for positive change. The girl who had once been world famous as Baby Peggy ultimately found her most meaningful role as Diana Sarah Carey, historian, author, and voice for those exploited by the entertainment industry. 9. Scotty Beckett. With his signature sideways newsboy cap and mischievous grin, Scotty Beckett charmed audiences as one of the original Little Rascals in the Our Gang comedies. Later, he successfully transitioned to feature films, playing the younger versions of stars like Frederick March and Spencer Tracy, even appearing as the young Al Jolson in The Jolson Story. Scotty's early career seemed blessed. He worked constantly throughout the 1930s and 1940s, avoiding the sudden unemployment that befell many child actors. As a teenager, he even landed a recurring role in the popular Rocky Jones Space Ranger television series, suggesting he might be one of the rare child performers to successfully transition to adult roles. But behind Scotty's cheerful on-screen persona lurked mounting personal demons. His father's death when Scotty was 14 sent him into an emotional tailspin from which he never fully recovered. In his late teens, he began a pattern of self-destructive behavior, drinking heavily, abusing prescription medications, and engaging in increasingly erratic public incidents. His downward spiral accelerated in the 1950s. Multiple marriages ended in divorce, arrests for drunk driving, and check fraud accumulated, and his once promising career disintegrated. By the late 1950s, Scotty was unemployable in Hollywood, his reputation thoroughly destroyed by his unpredictable behavior and legal troubles. The final chapter of Scotty's life reads like a Hollywood cautionary tale. In May 1968, he checked into a nursing home after a serious beating, the circumstances of which remain mysterious. 2 days later, he was found dead in his room at age 38, reportedly from an overdose of barbiturates. The official cause was listed as probable self-inflicted death, though questions about the circumstances persist to this day. The contrast between the joyful, cap-wearing boy who delighted Depression-era audiences and the troubled man who died alone and nearly forgotten illustrates perhaps the darkest potential outcome of early fame. Scotty Beckett's promising life, which began with such laughter and opportunity, concluded in tragedy before he reached 40, a sobering reminder of fame's potential casualties. 10. Freddie Bartholomew. In the 1930s, no child star rivaled Freddie Bartholomew's refinement and dramatic ability. With his British accent, immaculate manners, and remarkable emotional range, he became MGM's answer to Fox's Shirley Temple, starring in literary adaptations like David Copperfield, Little Lord Fauntleroy, and Captains Courageous. At his peak, Freddie commanded $2,500 per week, an extraordinary sum during the Great Depression. His polished performances and proper demeanor made him Hollywood's ideal of the perfect English schoolboy, despite the fact that his real childhood had been anything but privileged. Behind Freddie's success lay a painful family drama. Born in London to impoverished parents, he was sent to live with an aunt who recognized his potential and brought him to America. When his film career took off, his biological parents suddenly reappeared, launching a bitter and highly publicized custody battle motivated largely by access to his earnings. The legal fees from these family disputes consumed much of Freddie's fortune. By the time he reached adolescence, changing audience tastes and his evolving appearance reduced his castability. The boy, who had once been MGM's prized possession, found himself dropped by the studio at age 14 when his contract expired. Unlike many former child stars, Freddie faced his career decline with remarkable grace. After serving in the Air Force during World War II, he reinvented himself completely, moving into television advertising. Starting as a sales representative, he eventually rose to become an executive and award-winning director of television commercials in New York. Freddie rarely discussed his film career in his adult years, preferring to be judged on his accomplishments in advertising rather than his childhood performances. When he died in 1992 at age 67, many of his advertising colleagues were surprised to learn that the respected executive in their midst had once been one of Hollywood's most famous children. His successful second career and dignified handling of his transition from fame offer a template for grace under pressure that few former child stars have managed to follow. 11. Jackie Coogan. Jackie Coogan holds the distinction of being Hollywood's first major child star. After Charlie Chaplin spotted the 7-year-old performing in vaudeville, he cast him as his co-star in The Kid, 1921, where Jackie's natural ability to evoke emotion made him an overnight sensation. His heart-wrenching performance as the abandoned child taken in by Chaplin's tramp character revealed an emotional depth rarely seen in performers of any age. Jackie's fame quickly reached extraordinary heights. His image appeared on toys, clothing, and food products worldwide. His bobbed haircut became a fashion trend for boys across America. By age 10, he had earned approximately $4 million, equivalent to about $60 million today, a fortune generated entirely by his preternatural acting abilities. But Jackie would never enjoy the wealth he generated. When he turned 21 and expected to access his earnings, he discovered a devastating truth. His mother and stepfather had squandered nearly all of his fortune on extravagant living, diamond rings, fancy cars, and luxury homes. Of the millions he had earned, only $126,000 remained. Jackie's subsequent legal battle against his own mother became nationwide news. Though ultimately receiving just a fraction of his earnings, his public fight led directly to the 1939 enactment of the California Child Actors Bill, commonly called the Coogan Law, which requires that a portion of child performers' earnings be set aside in protected trusts. While Jackie continued acting as an adult, he never recaptured his childhood fame. Later generations knew him primarily as Uncle Fester in the 1960s television series The Addams Family, a role far removed from the sensitive child who had once moved audiences to tears alongside Chaplin. Jackie's legacy lies less in his adult career than in the legal protections his personal tragedy created for future generations of child performers. Every young actor who benefits from financial safeguards owes a debt to the boy whose exploitation led to reform. 12. Beverly Washburn. With her expressive eyes and natural sincerity, Beverly Washburn became one of the most in-demand child actresses of the 1950s, though she never achieved the household name status of some of her contemporaries. Television viewers saw her regularly on programs like The Lone Ranger, Dragnet, and Leave It to Beaver, while film audiences recognized her from movies such as Shane and Old Yeller. Beverly's versatility kept her working steadily throughout her childhood and into her teens, a significant achievement when many young performers struggled to transition beyond their juvenile appeal. Directors valued her ability to cry convincingly on cue, often casting her in roles requiring emotional vulnerability. Unlike the tragic trajectories of many former child stars, Beverly navigated her transition from child performer to adult with relative stability. Though major starring roles eluded her as she matured, she continued finding work in television and film well into the 1970s, gradually shifting to smaller roles and occasional appearances. When acting opportunities eventually diminished, Beverly made a graceful exit from Hollywood, focusing on her family life and occasional fan conventions where her work in beloved films like Old Yeller still generates affection from classic film enthusiasts. Today, at 81, Beverly Washburn lives quietly in Las Vegas, occasionally appearing at film festivals and writing about her experiences in Hollywood's golden age. Her memoir, Real Tears, offers an insider's perspective on child acting in the 1950s without the sensationalism or bitterness that often characterizes such accounts. Beverly represents the middle path of former child actors, neither tragic casualty nor extraordinary success story. Her career illustrates how a young performer could work prolifically, step away gracefully when the time came, and build a satisfying life beyond the camera's focus. 13. June Lockhart. While many may not immediately categorize June Lockhart as a child star who disappeared, her career trajectory represents an important variation in the child actor narrative. Beginning her film career at age 13 in A Christmas Carol, 1938. Alongside her parents, both established actors, June successfully navigated the treacherous transition from child performer to adult actress, a path where many of her contemporaries faltered. After appearing in films throughout her teen years, including the memorable Meet Me in St. Louis, June found her greatest fame in television as an adult, playing maternal figures in iconic series like Lassie and Lost in Space. Her evolution from child performer to beloved TV mom represents a rarity in Hollywood, sustainable longevity across multiple phases of life. At 99 years old, June Lockhart remains one of the last living links to Hollywood's golden age, occasionally making public appearances and sharing stories from her remarkable 9-decade career in entertainment. Her success in avoiding the pitfalls that claimed many young performers offers an aspirational counterpoint to the more tragic stories that often dominate discussions of former child stars. 14. Gloria Jean. With her soprano voice and wholesome appeal, Gloria Jean was briefly groomed as a potential successor to Universal Studios' singing sensation Deanna Durbin. After making her film debut in The Under Pup, 1939, Gloria appeared in a string of musical features designed to showcase her considerable vocal talents, including several films with comedy star Donald O'Connor. Despite appearing in over 20 films before she turned 21, Gloria's career began fading in the late 1940s as audience tastes shifted away from the innocent musical comedies that had been her specialty. Universal declined to renew her contract, and subsequent roles at smaller studios failed to reignite her career momentum. Unlike many performers who desperately clung to fading fame, Gloria made a clear-eyed assessment of her prospects and chose stability over the uncertainty of chasing diminishing returns in Hollywood. By the early 1950s, she had left entertainment entirely, taking a job as a hostess for Redken Laboratories and later working as an executive receptionist. Gloria lived comfortably in her post-fame decades, raising her son and maintaining private connections with a few Hollywood friends while building a life completely removed from her earlier celebrity. When interviewed years later about her decision to leave entertainment, she displayed no regrets, noting pragmatically that when the time came to move on, I moved on. Her death in 2018 at age 92 received little media attention, a testament to how completely she had stepped away from public life. Gloria Jean's graceful exit from fame exemplifies how a brief moment in the spotlight need not define one's entire existence. 15. Kevin Corcoran. Disney fans of the 1950s and 1960s instantly recognized Kevin Corcoran as Moochie, the archetypal all-American boy who appeared in numerous Disney productions, including the Spin and Marty serials on the Mickey Mouse Club and films like Old Yeller, The Shaggy Dog, and Swiss Family Robinson. With his freckled face and mischievous energy, Kevin embodied the idealized American boy of the post-war era. Walt Disney himself took a personal interest in his career, casting him repeatedly and helping shape his public image as the quintessential kid brother character. Unlike many child stars who struggle with the transition to adulthood, Kevin recognized early that his future might lie behind the camera rather than in front of it. After studying theater arts at California State University, he made a successful transition to assistant directing and producing, working on shows like Quantum Leap, Baywatch, and Murder, She Wrote. Kevin's behind-the-scenes career actually lasted longer and proved more consistently successful than his acting career, a rarity among former child performers. His understanding of on-set dynamics, informed by his own experiences as a young actor, made him particularly effective when directing child performers in his later career. When Kevin passed away from colorectal cancer in 2015 at age 66, he left behind a legacy of professionalism in two distinct Hollywood careers. First as Disney's reliable child star, then as a respected television producer and director. His successful transition from one side of the camera to the other illustrates an adaptability that eludes many former child performers. 16. John Provost. When John Provost joined the cast of Lassie in 1957 as Timmy Martin, he stepped into what would become one of the most recognizable child roles in television history. For 7 years, his adventures with the famous collie captivated audiences worldwide, making his face one of the most recognized in America. At the height of the show's popularity, John received more than 2,000 fan letters weekly. His blonde hair and innocent expressions became synonymous with the wholesome family entertainment that defined much of 1950s television. Unlike his Lassie predecessor Tommy Rettig, John left the series through mutual agreement rather than conflict. At age 14, feeling he had outgrown the role of the perpetually young Timmy, John and his parents decided not to renew his contract. The character of Timmy and his family were written out of the show by having them move to Australia, notably taking Lassie with them, though the collie would conveniently find her way back to America for the series to continue with new human co-stars. Post, Lassie Lassie, John faced the typical challenges of a former child star. A few roles in film and television followed, but nothing approached his earlier fame. Rather than pursuing acting opportunities with diminishing returns, John eventually chose to step away from Hollywood entirely. After attending college, John built a successful career in real estate development in Northern California, about as far from the entertainment industry as one could get while remaining in the state. He married, raised children, and established a life far removed from his days of on-screen adventures with television's most famous dog. Today, at 74, Jon Provost has made peace with his unique place in television history. He occasionally appears at nostalgia conventions, has written a memoir titled Timmy's in the Well, playfully referencing a catchphrase that, ironically, was never actually used in the series. John's story represents the healthier end of the child star spectrum. Someone who enjoyed his time in the spotlight, left on his own terms, built a stable adult life outside entertainment, and can look back on his unusual childhood with perspective rather than bitterness. 17. Bonita Granville. Bonita Granville first gained attention playing vicious, troubled children, most notably as the manipulative Mary Tilford in These Three, 1936, a role that earned her an Academy Award nomination at age 13. Her convincing portrayal of malevolent youth stood in stark contrast to her contemporaries' typically saccharine performances. After establishing herself as a dramatic actress, Bonita found her greatest success portraying teenage sleuth Nancy Drew in a series of films from 1938 to 1939. As her childhood fame waned, she continued acting in progressively smaller roles throughout the 1940s, appearing in films like Now Voyager and Hitler's Children. While many child actors struggle to find purpose after their performing careers fade, Bonita executed one of Hollywood's most successful pivots. In 1947, she married oil millionaire and film producer Jack Rather. Together, they built the powerful Rather Corporation. Bonita transitioned from actress to executive producer, helping shape the very Lassie series that would later star Jon Provost and Tommy Rettig. Under her business leadership, the Rather Corporation became a significant force in entertainment and hospitality. By the time of her death from cancer in 1988, Bonita Granville Rather had transformed herself from child actress to powerful business executive, her later accomplishments ultimately overshadowing her early acting career. Her remarkable evolution from performing to producing and business leadership represents perhaps the most dramatic career reinvention of any former child star. 18. Martin Stevens, British child actor. Martin Stevens created two of the most memorable and disturbing child performances in horror film history: the eerie David Zellaby in Village of the Damned, 1960, and Possessed Miles in The Innocents, 1961. His ability to project otherworldly menace while maintaining the appearance of childhood innocence established him as one of the most distinctive child performers of his era. Despite his evident talent and the critical acclaim these performances generated, Martin's acting career proved surprisingly brief. After a handful of additional film and television appearances, he made his final screen appearance at age 16, then simply disappeared from public view. For decades, horror film fans wondered what had happened to the chilling child from these classic films. Martin maintained his privacy so completely that many believed him dead or living in obscurity. The truth was far more prosaic. In recent years, Martin has occasionally broken his silence to participate in retrospective documentaries about the classic horror films that featured his performances, though he views these early acting experiences as a completely closed chapter in his life. 19. Johnny Crawford. As the original Mark McCain on The Rifleman, Johnny Crawford portrayed the archetypal Western son opposite Chuck Connor's widowed father, Lucas McCain. For 5 seasons, audiences watched Johnny grow up on screen, his character maturing from a 12-year-old boy to a young man approaching adulthood. Johnny's appeal extended beyond acting. He also enjoyed a successful recording career in the early 1960s, with several singles reaching the Billboard Top 40, including Cindy's Birthday and Rumors. For a time, he seemed poised to achieve that rarest of show business feats, a successful transition from child actor to adult entertainer. As sometimes happens with television personalities, however, Johnny found himself somewhat typecast by his rifleman role. Though he continued to work in television and film through the 1960s and early 1970s, including a regular role on Hawaii Five-0, his opportunities gradually diminished as he aged out of his boyish image. This musical career, though far less visible than his television fame, provided artistic satisfaction and a steady livelihood well into his later years. Johnny's passion for vintage music and his willingness to reinvent himself in a niche that brought him joy offer a template for post-fame fulfillment. In 2019, Johnny was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he passed away in 2021 at age 75, having lived a life that balanced his early fame with later artistic pursuits entirely on his own terms. 20. Jay North. Few child actors were more instantly recognizable in the early 1960s than Jay North as the mischievous Dennis the Menace, complete with striped shirt, overalls, and distinctive blonde cowlick. Based on the popular comic strip character, the television series ran from 1959 to 1963, making Jay one of the most famous children in America. The reality behind Jay's cheerful on-screen persona was far darker than viewers realized. His aunt and uncle, who served as his guardians on set, subjected him to emotional and psychological abuse, threatening him with punishment if he didn't perform perfectly. The pressure to maintain Dennis's perpetually energetic demeanor while dealing with his guardian's cruelty created nearly unbearable stress for the young actor. When Jay outgrew the Dennis role at 12, his career quickly faltered. Typecast as the rambunctious Dennis, he struggled to find appropriate roles as a teenager. A few failed television series followed, as did a stint in the Navy, but his acting opportunities steadily diminished. By his 20s, Jay was working as a corrections officer, about as far from Hollywood as one could imagine. The psychological impact of his childhood fame and the abuse he had endured left lasting scars, and for many years he struggled with depression and resentment. Today, at 73, Jay North lives quietly away from Hollywood, occasionally participating in autograph shows or interviews about his experiences. He has been remarkably candid about the psychological toll of childhood fame and the importance of protecting young performers from exploitation. Jay's willingness to speak honestly about the darker realities behind his seemingly idyllic television childhood has helped raise awareness about the unique challenges facing child actors, making his long-term impact perhaps more significant than the brief television series that made him famous. And that concludes our journey through the lives of these remarkable child stars from Hollywood's golden age. From the tragic fate of Bobby Driscoll to the inspiring reinvention of Shirley Temple Black, these stories reveal the complicated reality behind the seemingly magical childhood fame these young performers experienced. If you've enjoyed this look back at these fascinating lives, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more journeys through Hollywood's golden age. Which of these stories surprised you the most, and which former child stars would you like us to profile in future videos? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time for another glimpse into Hollywood's fascinating past.